Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Ozlu, Tunceli, Executive Director of the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. Welcome to our third quarter political insider briefing. The timing is perfect following Congress adjourning last Friday, so we have a lot of news to share with you. I'm just going to wait another moment. So as people are filing in, I can see the numbers going up and up in terms of participants. So we're just going to take a moment so that everyone can be on board before we get started with lots of great information. I will say that if you have some good burning questions that are either triggered by today's conversation or that you came with questions, the place to put your question is in the Q&A. So if you scroll down and hover over the bottom part of your screen on the bar, you'll see a Q&A box, and that's where you'll want to put it, your question. And then for those who agree that they want that question answered, we encourage you to upvote that so it goes to the top of the list, because the most number of votes for that question will rise to the top. It doesn't go in time chronological order. And it helps us make sure that the questions that are most desired to be asked will be asked by me to the panelists today. Okay, I think this is a good moment to start. And again, for those who have just joined us, welcome to our third quarter Americans for the Arts Action Fund Political Insider Briefing. We are joined today by Lyndon who is on the board of the Arts Action Fund and is the chairman of the Arts Action Fund Political Action Committee, which has been actively supporting pro-arts candidates this fall and more to come. You can also post in the Q&A any recommendations that you have that we should consider giving to, especially some candidates in some close races who have shown their art support. Maybe we've already given to them, but it would be nice if you wanted to post that in the Q&A for our consideration. Also joining us today is Bill Harper, who for the last year and a half has been an incredible advisor to both Americans for the Arts and the Arts Action Fund on both legislative activities and efforts and political efforts. He is formerly the Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Betty McCollum, who I'm pleased to say we have maxed out on giving in terms of a political contribution this year because of the incredible efforts that she has done to advance the arts within Congress. I thank you both for joining today. So I'm going to begin with the big question that's on every headline of every newspaper, and that is how the presidential elections are going. We'll also go into congressional elections, but Lyndon, I'd like to start with you by looking at a forecast 36 days out before the election. Where do you see things happening? I know that you have shared something from Real Politics that, Morgan, if you could post on our chat here of a link to some things that Lyndon will be talking about.
Thanks, Nina. Thank you, Morgan, for your help. And I do recommend you access this update on the presidential, the House races, and the Senate. The bottom line is right now it's a coin toss. This election is tight as a tick, and the poll numbers are all within the margin of error. The national polls essentially have Harris up by 2 points, but in the 7 battleground states where this election is going to be determined, they can go either way. In the blue wall, in the South, and those are the 2 key areas that everyone is focused on. Naturally, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and the Midwestern states, and also out west in the Sun Belt with Nevada and Arizona. You have to juxtapose some of these states with the Senate races that are up, because you do have some key Senate incumbent races with Nevada and Arizona. Arizona has an open seat. Nevada has an incumbent, but lots of money is being spent there by the candidates. North Carolina has now entered into the conversation a little bit, but they just suffered from this terrible hurricane, which our hearts go out to any of those of you on this call from North Carolina. But everyone realizes the bottom line is Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. So that's really the bottom line. And the point I do want to emphasize is that we're still a ways out with this. The media cycles these days. I mean, this thing can turn around, 2 or 3 times before we get to election day. I mean, tomorrow night is the presidential debate with the vice presidential nominees, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, and we expect a lot of fireworks with those two candidates. But no one is seeding Georgia at this point. Harris has been there a couple of times. She's trying to bone up on her policy credentials in areas that are of concern to most Americans, namely the economy, and putting some meat on the bones on her opportunity economy message, which was delivered in a speech she gave in Pittsburgh, and also going down to the border because naturally she's been vulnerable there. Mr. Trump has been very aggressive in his attacks of her, but really focusing primarily on the economy and are you better off now than you were 4 years ago. I don't know how many of y'all watched the last debate, but it was certainly an entertaining one. We got a couple of quips and quotes from that in terms of, eating cats and eating dogs. And but I will give Mr. Trump, the former president, a lot of credit with that first question: are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And the vice president didn't really answer that question when asked. And so, but she was such an effective debater that I think she was the victor. That's in the rearview mirror, and we're all looking forward to this debate tomorrow night, to more economic numbers. The economic numbers seem to be getting better. Obviously, the Fed cut the basis points 0.5%, which wasn't expected. I think 0.25% was expected. The Dow is off the charts, but a lot can happen. Like this hurricane, you could have other situations where undocumented immigrant can attack or cause a crime, and they're going to milk that as they did back in the Dukakis HW race, which those of you old enough to remember that race, called the Willie Horton ad, really had an impact on that race. So I still think we're a long way from an accurate prediction. And right now, I would probably say I would give the edge to Harris, mainly because of the enthusiasm gap. There's a lot of enthusiasm with young people and young women, for that ticket. But Trump's base of support is solid as a rock, and folks are turning out, and you don't know how they're going to vote in that polling booth because Trump has overperformed in all the last elections. People didn't expect him to do as well as he did, certainly against Hillary Clinton, and he beat her. And even with Joe Biden, it was razor thin. I think Georgia was kind of the surprise result there. There's the 7 battleground states, as you may know, are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And right now they're pretty evenly split with both candidates. So Nita, why don't I end there and just, I do want to add one other point, that in terms of the money game, that the Harris-Walz ticket has generated significantly more in terms of money than the Trump campaign. And she just raised, I think, 50 million in California, and she ended that trip early. But the money just has been falling out of the sky for the Harris-Walz ticket, and I think that's going to help them with get out the vote, along with the union support that they have by and large. Some of the unions, while they didn't endorse publicly, like the Teamsters, some of their related groups, like the Black Teamsters, have endorsed the Harris-Walz ticket. So, I'm not willing to make a prediction yet, but if I had to, if you twisted my arm, of course, I am a Democrat. My name is Lyndon. I would probably say that I would give the edge, a slight edge, but a very, very slight edge to Harris right now. But I still think things are going to change between now and November 5th.
So Lyndon, the resources that you shared with us were from Real Clear Politics. Can you tell us what kind of a source that is? Is it
yes, they essentially, they essentially are an aggregator of other polls. And so the two websites that we draw on for our weekly report, which I can share, which I've shared with you the last 2 weeks, are the Real Clear Politics. They take the averages of polls from different newspapers, different media organizations, different polling centers. And we also look at the Cook Political Report, which has a pretty good track record. And you'll see Amy Walter on Meet the Press from time to time. She's very respected, and her predictions seem to be, relatively, accurate and on point. But polling has gotten more and more difficult, because people don't answer the phone. Young people don't respond to them. They don't answer their cell phones. So that's why I think, because we're seeing a very close, even division here in these polls, that, either candidate could actually overperform. And I wouldn't be surprised by it, just like in the Trump Clinton race, where Clinton, no, that was not predicted in the Midwest, and Trump, blew her out there. And Biden certainly wasn't expected to win Georgia. So, polls are a snapshot in a day. And as you said, what do we have? 36 days until the election.
Right.
So, and we have, this debate tomorrow, I think, might have a slight impact, but the economic numbers, and people's feelings about their own situation, and then lately they've tended to be feeling slightly better. I think, bodes well for her. But again, you could have an incident, the situation in Israel, is getting worse, not better. And that's on Biden's watch. Obviously, they just tried to do a ceasefire, which didn't work. And in fact, they went in and assassinated the head of Hezbollah. And that, after telling the Americans that, we would consider this peace deal that was agreed to, apparently, although the Israelis are saying it wasn't. So, I mean, issues like that can impact, the results. And people like strength. And one thing about Donald Trump you can say about him, he projects strength. And I think that, that is why he has a lot of support amongst white males. There's a huge gender gap, as most of you know, in this competition, with women, college educated, especially favoring Harris, and men favoring Trump. I don't have those specific numbers, but non-college educated white males are off the chart with Trump, and even most males are for Trump. So the question is turnout. You have a couple of ballot initiatives on reproductive rights, like in Florida, that's going to turn out people, as it did in Ohio and other states. And when you have those ballot initiatives, people turn out and vote for them one way or the other. And that's going to help with turnout in a couple of states. I would say that, Democrats are trying to put sort of Texas and Florida on the radar for Democrats to possibly upset Rick Scott in Florida and Ted Cruz in Texas. I mean, I think that's a little, they're still both in the likely Republican column versus the lean Republican column. I don't see that happening. In the Senate, I think most folks believe John Tester's in real trouble in Montana. It's going to be hard to hold on to Montana, although I don't rule John Tester out. I know him. I think he could hang in there and pull this out. You never know. But right now, West Virginia is gone. That's going to go Republican. That gets you to a 50-50 Senate. And then Sherrod Brown has to win Ohio to keep it 50-50, as does Tester. And, I think most pundits believe one of those two elections will probably be lost, and the Republicans will pick one of those up, and that will give them the majority. And then you still have, Arizona and Nevada, which are no cakewalks, for the Democrats. Although Gallego is up and Jackie Rosen is up in those two states. But, the presidential spending in those two states, because they're competitive, are going to help both Rosen and Gallego and vice versa. So, that interplay is pretty interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Bill, you are actually in Minnesota. And for a while there, it looked like Minnesota was teetering whether it was going Republican or Democrat on the presidential election. But I think there's a firmer update on that. Do you want to share anything on that?
Yes, thank you, Nina. Thank you, Lyndon. That was a great overview. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota today, and we've already started voting. Early voting started here September 20th. So we've got about 6 weeks of election day here. And the polls right now have Vice President Harris and Governor Walz ahead by about 5 percentage points in Minnesota. And that was significantly boosted with the selection of Vice President Walz to the ticket. But it is like many states, there's a great divide between urban and suburban Minnesota, Twin Cities and its suburbs, and greater Minnesota and the rural areas, where it really is deep, deep blue in the urban suburban areas and deep red in the rural and greater Minnesota areas. So this is part of the divide that we're seeing.
Right. And I'd like to just add a little bit about what we learned from our Congressional Arts Report Card that was published not only this year for 2024, but previous ones, because some of the candidates were in Congress previously, and I could track their arts record. So I know that we're an arts organization, so we want to add how does this affect the arts in terms of this election? So specifically, Vice President Harris used to be Senator Harris from California. And so I look back at her congressional arts record, and I can firmly say that she got thumbs up, being very proactive on the Senate Cultural Caucus and on supporting arts related bills. And then specifically, Governor Walz used to be Congressman Walz on the House side, and he had an A+ voting record when there were enough bills that we could track. Instead of just giving a thumbs up, we could give a grade. And he had a phenomenal track record of supporting the arts and specifically arts funding bills. On the Republican side, Senator Vance is a current senator. And unfortunately, he did not do a single act in support of the arts. So he did not get a thumbs up from the Arts Action Fund. And then President Bush, during his 4-year term, 4 years in a row, tried to eliminate all funding for the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, Institute for Museum Library Services. So he did not get a good voting record from the Arts Action Fund because of his record. So it makes it clear that as far as the arts are concerned and funding for the arts in the future, the Democratic ticket, with its prior history of support for the arts, and of course, Vice President Harris also represents the Biden administration's record, and the President Biden has asked for increases in funding, not only not cutting, but asked for increases in funding for the arts. So there's a clear winner from our perspective of how it would support the arts. And if President Trump were to get reelected, we would be looking at a lot of hard work in protecting the arts and humanities in America. Let's look at congressionally what could happen on an electoral level. And I'll go back to, I'm actually going to start with you, Bill, on this one, to talk a little bit about how close it is in the House and the Senate today, and what's the outlook looking like in terms of right now, Republicans are in control of the House and Democrats are in control of the Senate. What do you think this election is going to bring to us?
This is a, not to use a bad term, but a dog fight. They're not just talking about eating dogs. The dogs are out there fighting on the campaign trail. And whether it's the presidential race, the House races, the Senate, control of the Senate, this is a very, very competitive environment all across the country. So 4 seats separate the Republican majority and the Democratic minority. And there are a number of seats in New York and California that are in play. There are some open seats around the country. Here in Minnesota, we have in the 2nd congressional district, Congresswoman Angie Craig, it's a 50-50 district. I think it's the most competitive, evenly split district in the country, controlled by a Democrat. We have some seats in which Democrats have won in Trump districts and Republicans have won in Biden districts. So this is the battleground, the map of the battleground. And unlike the presidential race, where I think many of the voters are pretty locked in, it is not a persuasion campaign as much as a motivation campaign. Who can drive the people to the polls? Some of these House races they're still undecideds and persuadables. So this is both a for many House seats, it's both a national campaign, but also with a local flavor. How do those national issues play locally? So and Lyndon hit on many of the Senate seats. Yeah, this is a very interesting environment. In many of these competitive states where there's presidential competition, Democratic senators are running strong. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin is leading. Ruben Gallego is leading. Elise Slotkin in Michigan is the Democrat who is leading. So Jackie Rosen's ahead, I think, by 8 points in Nevada. So Democrats in the Senate, especially incumbents and a couple of the challengers, they seem to be doing better. But again, President Trump is running strong, almost even in all of those states as well.
Great. And we're getting a request from our audience. If you could come a little bit closer to the mic so that they can hear you more, Bill, that would be great.
Great.
Lyndon, is there anything that you want to add on this point?
Well, I think that the fact that the Democrats have a lot of money, more not only on the presidential level but the congressional level, with the House, that folks are back to predicting a Democratic flip of the House. So Hakeem Jeffries would then become the first African American speaker in history, and of course, if Kamala wins, she'd be the first sort of African American or mixed race woman to occupy the White House. So I think that part of that is not lost on a lot of people in this country, and that's driving enthusiasm. The money, I mean, the money is a reflection of enthusiasm. I'm really glad Bill mentioned Michigan because I'd sort of ignored it or left it out of the my summary. But Michigan is a toss-up state. There's an excellent Washington Post analysis, which Nina, I believe I sent you. I'm going to ask Morgan to try to find it while we're on this call. Basically, the 8 different ways Kamala or Trump can win in the Electoral College. And it shows how Kamala can win without Pennsylvania. Now she has to win other states, other key states, and Donald Trump, can win without Pennsylvania either. Everyone is sort of suggesting, Pennsylvania's make or break. It is, but there are other ways doing the math, including Nebraska. No one's mentioned this one vote that in Omaha that could go to the Democrats, which could decide the election. So Morgan, if you can just find that Washington Post article, it's pretty recent. I can, certainly I sent it to you, Nina. So it might be in your sort of your text chain.
What we can do is, if we don't get a chance to get it in the chat, we will post it on the landing page, which is the second link that's been posted for this Political Insider, all the resources and links that we talk about. So either way, we're going to get it to them. They can come back to this page.
I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in the presidential election read the Washington Post article on how Kamala can get to 270 and how Trump can get to 270. Because what it does is it combines all the different possibilities. And it really is. I mean, there's 8 different scenarios, that could result in either of them winning.
And Lyndon and Bill, Election Day, as we know, is November 5th, but Election Day decision is unlikely to be November 5th. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I've been hogging the mic, so I welcome Bill's commentary here. I mean, the last election wasn't decided on election night, so it's going to be very tricky with vote counting in Georgia, which can be requested to be done by hand. And there's a lawsuit revolving that case in Georgia, and so other states can take additional time, and it will take additional time. So I don't expect us to know the outcome on election night, and it may be weeks. I mean, if you remember, the Gore Bush election in 2000, that took months. I hope it doesn't result in that length of time. But there's lots of sort of legal efforts being made here to ensure that these elections are legitimate. And I think there's lots of eyes on the local officials that handle these elections, because they're not done by the federal officials; they're done locally, and every state has different rules. So it's going to be I think a very long election night and a long election week, unless one of the 2 candidates just surprises us and does much better than expected. And that could be Harris, and I'll tell you, that could be Trump. I mean, there's a lot of folks who don't admit that they'll support and like him, but secretly they do. And his numbers haven't budged no matter what he does. They're the same, and they're relatively strong. And so, and we've really, the Democrats have really only had since the convention to introduce Kamala Harris to the country. And I think they've been doing a pretty good job. They brought in a lot of Obama people, and it worked for Obama. He got elected twice. So the Harris people have been very, very smart, very sharp. One of the first decisions they made, which was public with the vice presidential pick, I thought was brilliant. I mean, how do you find a person who doesn't own real estate or stock but owns guns from the Midwest and met his wife in a high school classroom. I mean, you know, he's being attacked for being too liberal of a governor. And I think, you know, you'll hear that tomorrow night. But I think she's off to a pretty good start here with the convention, the VP pick, and the debate. And the money reflects that. And but we'll see. I mean, 36 days is a lot of time for Donald Trump, you know, to come back and win this thing. And I know he's very, very popular in the South. And Georgia's
Yeah.
Georgia's a very, very important state. I think most people really don't think Georgia will go blue. They think it's probably going to go red. Last time you had Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock on the ticket. Raphael Warnock really brought out a lot of black voters. Maybe Kamala can have that same impact by bringing out black voters, but she's from California. She's not from Georgia. So I would say, you know, Georgia, if you have to sort of lean one way or the other, you're probably leaning Trump.
Yeah. Bill, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I think we're going to see something that's a bit unprecedented, which is really, it's going to be a second phase of this election from November 6th to January 20th. There are already lawsuits being filed, laying the groundwork for a post-election challenge. We saw what happened in 2020 when then President Trump, you know, mobilized across the nation to try and overturn the election results. And we all remember what happened on January 6, 2021. So I do think there is going to be a second phase to this. There are going, you know, the ability for voters to go to the polls and ensure that their votes are cast and that voter protection is going to be an issue between now and election day. So I think, you know, there's a lot of talk about democracy being on the ballot, and, you know, as citizens, whatever party we are, you know, we all have the obligation to ensure that our democracy is protected and this right that we have is protected. So this is, there are big questions both on the ballot and in the exercise of our franchise this election.
Right. And specifically there, those who know, we have created voter fact sheets of how to effectively get your vote counted for every state. And Morgan's going to post access to that for your state. The key here to note is that there are some states, and Mississippi and Pennsylvania are among them, where you're allowed to mail in your ballot and as long as it's postmarked by November 5th, it will be counted up to 3 to 5 days after the election, as long as they receive it and it shows it's postmarked. And that's now being challenged. And the Republicans have taken this to the circuit court representing Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, where they are challenging the notion that that should be even allowed. And we're only 36 days away from the election. And the hope is that this gets those that are determining this in the circuit court are Trump appointees, and that it might even go to the Supreme Court. We don't know what's going to happen, but with our voter fact sheets, we always ask that you vote as early as possible. Do not wait and postmark your mail-in ballot to election day. Do it as early as possible. So that's in play. And then Lyndon mentioned, or it was Bill, the Nebraska issue, where there is a challenge there are 2 states that don't take winner take all, and that's Maine and Nebraska, where it's divided by congressional district. And in Nebraska, the Omaha area typically votes Democratic. And so the Republicans are trying to make it a winner take all, so that 2 of the other seats that do vote Republican will be able to take the entire state and not allow Omaha its one electoral vote for wherever they choose. Historically, it's been Democratic on a presidential election, and congressional for that matter. And so there is a challenge happening where Senator Lindsey Graham has gone to try to convince the governor and the state legislative group to have a special session of their state Congress to be able to change it. It looks like that they are not getting enough Republican senators to go with this. So it's probably unlikely that the Nebraska vote is going to go in that direction. But it is a big unknown what's going to happen in this federal appellate case that is happening in the South. Pennsylvania's is not being challenged at the moment, but this could affect a lot of states if it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court historically has said that they do not like to get involved in in election changes in law so close to the election. But that was said by a previous Supreme Court chair justice. So we don't know what will happen here. So a lot of things happening at the same time. The one thing now in terms of how it applies to the arts is I've recently come across a great thing that's been placed on social media and the YouTube, and I don't know if everyone has seen it, but there is a great tableside interview between Vice President Harris and her vice presidential candidate Walz on culture and music. And it's a great interview between each other on their views on cultural issues and on arts and music issues. And I would encourage people to Google this interview between Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on culture and music. And maybe Morgan will be able to also do that Google and then post it in our chat here.
Well, anyone who watched the convention would have seen the musicians performing during the roll call for each of the state delegations. And I talked to Mignon Moore, the head of the convention, and at an event I was at, and she was asked, how did that come about? She said, oh, some young, a person suggested it. And we said, well, go look into it. And when she came back with all these brilliant artists from different states, no one knows where a lot of these artists are from. I mean, Common, who knew Common was from Chicago? Maybe some of you did, but they were able to find different artists. Kansas, remember the band Kansas? So, I mean, I thought that was really thoughtful and creative, and really made it a lot more entertaining too, to have those roll calls instead of just rattling off, the votes for Harris Waltz, to have a DJ or a musician perform with each state. So I think, I think that was really unique for this convention, and really showed the power, impact of politics, the arts in politics.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's now talk about legislatively what's happening. Congress passed finally a continuing resolution on September 25th, signed into law by the president on September 26th. Bill, I'm going to throw this one to you to ask, what is the significance of that? What is the significance that they made the deadline December 20th instead of past the inauguration date of whoever the next president is, which was what the first attempt was? And if you can have any thoughts on impact of the election on that in a lame duck session, and perhaps what impact on the arts?
Well, the process by which the continuing resolution for FY25 was passed is part of the political story. The Republican-controlled House majority proposed a continuing resolution with some very onerous restrictions on it related to voting, and they couldn't pass it off the floor. And it forced Speaker Johnson to come forward and work with Democrats to put forward what's called a clean CR, essentially extending fiscal year 2024 spending with only a few anomalies. And what was interesting about that process is the Speaker's own Rules Committee refused to pass it, which meant the continuing resolution had to come to the floor under what's called suspension of the rules, which requires not a simple majority, but a 2/3 majority of the chamber. Every Democrat voted for the continuing resolution to fund the government. 83 Republicans voted against it. It then went over to the Senate, where it was effectively quite non-controversial. It passed with an overwhelming majority. And we now have a continuing resolution that keeps the government funded through December 20th. And this is, I would call it a traditional timeframe. This is an election year. Members are retiring. Members will lose their elections, and the dust will settle after the election, and the leadership of both parties will come together and see if they can get it together to fund the government before the end of the year. Personally, I'm somewhat skeptical, and I'm skeptical because they have not yet started negotiations. The two chambers have not started negotiations on the bills. It's a onerous process. It's a heavy lift to do all this work on 12 appropriation bills. So I suspect that we'll wait and see who's going to be controlling the White House, who will be controlling the Senate and US House for the next session. And if this, I would not be surprised in the least if this gets kicked into the new calendar year, the new Congress, and possibly or likely the new, whoever's the next occupant of the White House.
So Congress adjourned last Friday,
Yes.
September 27th, and they will not be back in Washington until November 12th.
Correct.
As I understand, which is after the election. So this is about 6 weeks or 5-6 weeks of them back home trying to get themselves reelected or getting others elected. So as you said, that leaves a short window between November 12th and December 20th to even begin those negotiations on things. So with a continuing resolution, that means there's level funding we're keeping it the same level funding. So for things like the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, what does that mean, Bill, in terms of where they're at?
So the current funding level of $207 million for the NEA and the NEH is sustained throughout the continuing resolution. For the fiscal year 25 bill, the Senate is at $209 million. The House is at 203.9. That's an easy number the negotiations on that are quite easy. And I suspect from the indication of Chairman Mike Simpson of the Interior Environment Appropriations Subcommittee, he's willing to take the Senate number, the higher number. So I think that can be a position that can be worked out quite easily in conference. But I mean, the NEA and the NEH is going to be a very small piece of the massive $1.6 trillion discretionary budget.
Right. And in terms of elections, the current chair, as you mentioned, of the Interior is Mike Simpson, a Republican from Idaho, and the Democratic vice chair is Shelley Pingree of Maine. I want to let folks know that these two have safe races. These two are members of Congress that the Arts Action Fund PAC has supported at maximum levels because they are both pro-arts. So I feel really in good hands on that House side. And on the Senate side, neither senator is up for re-election. Senator Merkley and Murkowski of Alaska. So we wouldn't see much leadership change regardless if the Senate goes Republican controlled or if this House goes Democratic controlled. We're in good hands in terms of pro-arts leaders. I'll also add that when President Bush was president, there was a moment, a couple of years, where the House was controlled by Republicans and the Senate was controlled by Republicans. And not only did they reject his notion of zeroing out these federal agencies, they actually provided increases year to year. And that has a lot to do with the Arts Action Fund members who talked to their members of Congress and advocated for support for these federal cultural agencies because they meant something back home in their state and in their district. So we will need all hands on deck again if something like that happens. I'm going to now go to the Q&A to see if there is something that we could ask you. And it says, what is the rationale for those who do not want to support the NEA and the alike? And what percentage of tax dollars go to supporting the arts? Bill, I think you're probably the one who might want to answer this one.
Well, $207 million out of 1.6 trillion. I'm not good with the math, but it's probably 0.0001% of the federal discretionary budget. And then if you look at the full federal budget with entitlement spending, which is about $6 trillion, it is minuscule. And we have to remember what the federal investment in the arts is a tiny fraction of what the revenue that the arts generate across the country for our economy, the jobs, the economic development. So as a nation and as a federal government, we could be doing much better. And I know Americans for the Arts is certainly trying to do much better.
Yeah. And in terms of conservatives who do not want, the second part of her question or his question was, for conservatives who do not support the concept of public funding for the arts, what's their rationale for that?
These are the same people who want to cut housing and education and in protecting the environment and other forms of discretionary spending. There's just a cadre of people in Congress who do not want to spend money, and they are willing to cut. And the arts and humanities are part of that.
Yeah. I want to report that Bronwyn Barr has shared with us that the winner-take-all proposal has been defeated in Nebraska. So there is not that threat anymore for Nebraska. Thank you, Bronwyn, for sharing that. Also, let me just read it before I read it out loud. Okay, there are a lot of compliments on a very different issue, on a lot of various issues. Will Project 2025 have an impact on the arts? Has anyone, I have a little thought on that, but I want to first hear from you two. Impact on the arts, Project 2025, which was done by an external conservative think tank.
Not the Heritage Foundation. It won't have an impact if Kamala Harris is elected president.
That's right. Go ahead.
Yeah, we already know where President Trump is on federal funding to the arts and humanities. You know, he has a record in his budgets. So we should, if he's president, we should expect the arts and humanities to be zeroed out.
As a proposal by him, but Congress.
Within his budget.
Right. And I will say that the Heritage Foundation, which I've historically tracked their recommendations to every president and congressional leader, has always requested that the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities always be zeroed out, but they are not specifically named in Project 2025.
But just for context, Project 2025 also calls for the elimination of the Department of Education, for example. So these are broad, sweeping, quite, I would call, quite extensive proposals, radical proposals, really.
Great, yeah. And then we also have another helpful person listening in who did the math. Renee Price, thank you. And she's saying that the numbers of percentage for arts and humanities for the total budget is 0.003%. So 0.003%. Thank you, Renee. Very helpful. That is going to be where we conclude today's insider briefing. You guys, yes, Lyndon.
We're not concluding just yet, Nina.
Okay.
Or Bill or Morgan. We have to ask people to support the Arts Action Fund. I mean, it's really important that even if it's $5 or $10 or $25, these are the monies that go to the members of Congress to help elect them to support the arts. It's very simple. And, dollars are precious, particularly with the cost of living being what it is. And, I don't give as much as I should give, but in fact, I'm going to give $250 today. And I'm going to do that quarterly, which is only $1,000 a year. And I usually do a little bit more around Christmas time, but I'm going to make that commitment to you, Nina. Your previous chair probably gave a lot more, but you didn't select me for my money. You selected me for.
Well, I know that your money is also going to individual candidates. You're probably getting close to maxing out as an individual and how much you can give politically. It's
all public, and it is a pretty big number. But I do hope folks that join this call. How many people did we have on the call?
99.
So there you go. It'd be great if some of you could help support and then have input into who you want us to support. This is
Yeah.
not a one-way street. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
So if there's recommendations that you have because you've spoken to your local member and represented the arts community and they've supported you and want to support the arts, then, please send their name our way. And, I already have some suggestions like Lloyd Doggett, who I talked with last week at a Congressional Arts Caucus event, that he just founded a new arts program. I don't know if you're aware of it.
I'm not.
Yeah, but I want to get you to go with Lloyd Doggett from Austin, Texas, because this was the first. It was done in conjunction with the Kennedy Center and others, but that was news to me. But there's a lot more of you out there than are in Washington, and that's where these members are elected, out there, not here. So let us know, and if you can support the Arts Action Fund, please do. And thank you for your indulgence and your time today.
Thank you so much. Okay, and thank you, Bill. I don't know if you have any last words.
No, I want to thank everybody for joining, and please vote.
Yes. If we're anything, we are voters. So thank you, everybody. We will have another quarterly political insider briefing in December. Hopefully we'll know the outcome of the presidential elections. So stay tuned with our emails and our updates in the meantime. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.